Welcome to It's a Woman's World. My name is Barbara Lavalure, and I'll be your host today. We have an exciting guest, Melissa Nambangi, and you probably recognize her because she's also been a co-host with It's a Woman's World for a few years. Beverly and Nadia will be asking questions, as will I. And I am, of course, fascinated by the fact that in your home country of Cameroon, you were an anchor and television host. So
Yes.
I'm going to be asking a question later. I think Beverly has the first question about your background, but
Okay.
so excited to have you here. So welcome, Melissa, and welcome
Thank,
guests. Thank you
thank
for
you.
joining us. Go ahead, Beverly.
Melissa, it's like, where do we start? You have such an interesting background. Can you tell the viewers how you came to when you came to the United States? You know, you were an anchor person in your home country, but then from there, what brought you to the United States? And I know when you came to the United States, there were a lot of challenges as well. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me as your guest. Um, I come from Cameroon and I was a TV news anchor as well as a journalist because we tend to get our news anchors from the journalists who do the reporting and all. So I happen to be that, and I also happen to be a co-host of a women's program, which was called Feminine Line. Um, and the stuff I used to do there and the reports I used to do for the news, which related to women, were actually what helped me get the Hubert Humphrey International Fellowship because they liked those reports I was doing. It was a fellowship for mid-career professionals. So we were about 14 of us here at the University of Minnesota, and we're all from different countries. So we did meet there, and there were several others in other. The program usually brings over 150 fellows from all over, from the developing world specifically.
Wow.
And so we all came for that. But after my Humphrey year, I went on to graduate school at the University of Minnesota. And I thought, since I was doing a graduate degree in journalism and mass communication, I decided to also do a minor in women's studies because I really wanted to work on women's issues. So that's how, from then on, I went on to, I was quite politically active in the Cameroonian community. And it was not a place you saw many women. It was not an area many women were involved in. So for about 6 or 7 years, I was very actively involved in that. And the issues were more about getting general human rights respected for every Cameroonian. But then the mood started changing and the younger people started agitating a little differently. And the organization I was with kind of dissolved and new organizations took over. So I focused on what I could do here in the US, what skill I could bring. And I decided then that it would be a good way to serve African women if I could start a nonprofit here. So before then, I was also, I served as a women's advocate in the domestic abuse shelter. So I got to learn a lot about the issues, especially immigrant women face in their homes and when they come for help in the shelter and where where there was some more need, like having people who understand the cultures they come from work with them. So those are some of the things that slowly led to me uh, building a nonprofit organization. So I did come here in 1992 and got my master's degree, and 10 years later started the Minnesota African Women's Association, MAWA. So that's a bit about what was going on. Of course, the challenges had to do with the weather, never seen a thing like winter. I remember the first day I was only 30 at the time, I think, like 30, I've forgotten. But at that age, crying because you fell in the snow is really not the kind of thing anybody would expect. But I did that. Was you see it, it looks so lovely in the movies, on TV, and oh, why didn't anybody tell you you slip and you fall and and you freeze and all of that. So yeah, I never forgot that winter. And I wasn't appropriately dressed. I didn't have all the thermal underwear, no thermal wear and all that stuff, but I did have the jacket and the gloves and the boots. By the second winter, I was ready. I was like, this is not gonna slow me down. I'm going to handle this. And so I slowly learned to deal with the winter.
Melissa,
Yes.
it absolutely amazes me that you could come from such a different culture and country and accomplish what you've done. What I was wondering about is, could you talk a little bit about the strongest influences? Was it the college that you went to, or did you have a mentor, or were both things involved in bringing you forward and into the forefront of what you decided to do?
It was my father. Our father was really a red gem. He did not hold the traditional views for daughters or for girls. He insisted, and he had 8 of us. He insisted that everybody was going to have the exact same opportunity. So, unlike a lot of his friends and neighbors who would focus on educating the boys beyond secondary school and send the girls off to get married and emphasize that marriage aspect, he insisted on everybody having a profession of his choice. He wanted me to be a lawyer. He wanted the next one to be a doctor. He chose those. And then the first two were girls, then two boys, then girl, boy. No. So he made sure that we went to the best schools. So even though tuition is very high in the private schools, we usually have the end of year assessment exam that we do to determine which school you go to. If you go to the public school, which is we also call the government colleges, tuition is free. But and the results are read. They are read over the radio. Wonderful day for those who make it. So they read the results, and the list A is those who did so well. The government school wants them, and then the list B, well, no, the government school won't take you because you didn't do that well. So he made sure we all passed in list A because of the emphasis he put. He never let me sit in the kitchen with my mother to be cooking and doing all that stuff. It was always go and study. So for the longest time, I was always with a book to my nose. So I did pass list A, but he said, no, you're going to go to Seca Baptist College, which was just a girls' boarding school and the best in the English-speaking part of the country. I mean, it's so good that even children from the French-speaking part are now sent there to study a lot of discipline. A lot of our professors were from the US here, North American Baptist Mission. In fact, we have one of our most influential vice principals who started off as a disciplined mother, house mother, became vice principal, Miss Wilma Binder. She's here in North Dakota in the nursing home, and we went and celebrated her 2 years ago. So she tells you, I have over 3,000 daughters because she was in the school for that long. So I went to that school, and every one of us who passed in list A, it didn't matter. Our father sent us to the best schools. So his influence, and then my mother's influence also. My mother always reminded us that our father's position was not ours. So it's something almost like a governor. So he had he's responsible for a state, except at that level is divisions. So he was a divisional officer, which was a big deal. But my mother always told us, he's the one who's that, it's not you. And because she was a teacher and had to stop because my father wanted her to stay home and take care of the children, she always told us, you are going to be my reward. You are going to carry on what I would have done. So the first time my mother came here, by then I had started MAWA, and I was all, the first thing she said as we met her at the airport, she was just like, she calls me by my Cameroonian name, Ndinge, you're helping women. I mean, she was so proud of that. And I was like, oh, this is good. So it is her. We had an event last weekend where they were doing for developing something back in Cameroon. And my daughter stood up and made a donation in her grandmother's name. And everybody was like, but that's the strong influence she had on us and the grandchildren. So that's where I get, it's good that I went to good schools. The School of Journalism I went to also was very competitive. You will have about 12, my class, we had 1,200 students, right? And only 21 were admitted, and I was the only girl. Because, so yeah. So that's the background to why I am to why I am the way that I am.
That is so inspiring. You're so fortunate to have wonderful and supportive parents. My goodness,
Yes.
I'm impressed. The part that impresses me as a journalist of over 50 years is your Hubert Humphrey International Fellow.
Yes.
And I have my own Hubert Humphrey story. Actually, he's one of my favorite interviewees that I interviewed in my career. I'm wondering, how did your background as a journalist help you with your nonprofit? And also, maybe you could give us one or two stories about how MAWA has supported African women.
Yes. My background, besides journalist, I also did teacher. I did teach for a bit at the University of Minnesota. I did teach a bit back in Cameroon, and then both parents were first teachers before my father became an administrator. So putting those two things together, the whole teaching thing makes me lean towards the kind of social service where the impact will be somebody learning and gaining something. So that urge to always be educating and informing people, I have it. My friends, if they hang around me for a bit, you can't ask a question, I'll give you the whole story from where the word came from and what it means and why, and some of them are just like, oh, and then, I always tell them, you ask a question around me, you'll get an answer. I don't, so that did help with me doing what I do now. And the whole, okay, what was the other part of the question?
How your background influenced your work, and maybe an example or two of stories how you help women.
Yes. So the whole, one of the things I really wanted was to, I really wanted at one point to work with the international, the organization or the international bodies, So I did try for that, and I figured, well, I really don't like traveling that much, and I don't like living in different places, like you try to go with the United Nations, they start sending you to some countries. I'm not that adventurous. I like being in one place and doing stuff. So I decided I will stay here, working at the shelter and seeing how difficult it was for the African women when they came there, knowing that it was a very risky decision they took and that the community will be so turned against them. And then knowing that they faced all of that and they chose to come to the shelter, you realize that they are in a very bad corner. But then also seeing that the staff at the shelter could not really provide some needs for them. For instance, any immigration issue, they will not really understand. Because the interesting thing with the shelters and several other places is when there's training on immigration issues, they send the immigrant advocates, which is just ridiculous. We know the rules. We know how it works. So it should be the non-immigrants who go to learn, but they keep doing that. So knowing that they had all these issues, I started working with them, and I realized that they would need a nonprofit that understands that. So I started off with that interest, and I had there was a couple of other African women who joined me in that. But then when we started working with the women, in typical, it's not, I don't think it's only African women, I should say, but typical mothers, they said, oh, forget about us. Our daughters are having a really rough time. And so at that time, I think my kids were still, no, they had come, and because they grew up in Cameroon, they came as teenagers already. They were already settled in the way they knew that they should face the world. So they were not a problem at all. So I had to start finding out what was wrong. They were telling me the kids are trying to imitate certain behaviors. I had to start off with telling the girls all the time, you have rights, but you also have responsibilities, because too many of them were saying things like, well, I don't like washing dishes. And I'm like, oh, but you like eating? If I don't feel like doing it, I shouldn't do it. Well, you ate on the plate, you washed the plate. You can't turn your mother into a servant. So there was a lot of that going on. And so I started working towards that goal. And then we learned about the teen pregnancy, high rates in certain areas of the city among African girls. We started addressing that issue. Of course, the teen pregnancy led to school dropout rates being very high. We started working on college attendance. And just like that, we built the girls program to be full of ways of overcoming all these barriers that stood in their way. So some of the successes we've had are the number of girls who have gone to college from our program. Because our program is totally voluntary, we don't force anybody to attend. The school does not force anybody to attend. So all we do is focus on the girls there and how well they do. And from when we had it, all the girls in the program, they come and they stay mostly for 3 years, because some start from middle school, some is high school. They focus and stay, and they all apply to college and get admitted. So we do help them with finding the scholarships and the grants, opening up different careers to them. The women, they are more interested in how the financial independence kind of thing. And most of them love the long-term care business. So they love to do certified nursing assistants and all of that. So what I realized would help them a lot, because some of them, because of the low income wages, could not put together enough to go for their training. I mean, it's just about $1,500. But when the whole burden, everything that people need back home is they are calling, you will save that money, you will turn around and send it to somebody in need back home. So it became difficult for them. So what we did was find funding to pay for that. And in just 3 years, with the Department of Employment and DEED, with DEED funding, we got funding. We're supposed to train about 180 women in a 3-year period. We ended up training 219, because we put in that much effort, and 219 African women got trained as CNAs. The other thing I've often done, it's been a while now, we've not been able to get networks going, but when we had the New American Collaborative, and I was the chair of the steering committee, and during that period, there were a lot of times when there were issues, and women would call for me. Like there was a day I was sitting in my office overwhelmed with my own work, and one of my East African colleagues called and said, No, what are you doing? There's a meeting here with the mayor of Minneapolis, and all the men around the table and the women are sitting against the wall, and none of us is saying a word. Now, I didn't ask her, why are you not saying a word? Because I knew why. I knew her culture and all, even though she's very highly educated, it's not appropriate. She will receive a lot of backlash. I've received backlash too, but it doesn't really bother me because not in the immediate community as such. So they can't really reach me, you know. But as soon as she told me that, I dropped all I was doing. I drove over there. And as I came in, this long table with about 15 people sitting, no woman, all the women by the wall saying nothing and all. I just walked in and sat at the other end of the table, directly opposite the mayor. And I got this death glares, people looking at me and all. But the guy who was the organizer, he knew me very well. He was the executive director of the Confederation of Somali Communities in Minnesota, Said Fahia. He traveled back, he went back to Somalia and he has a high post with the government there. But he knew me very well and he knew what I did. So he looked at me, I was like, oh, hi, Melissa, welcome. And the guys were looking, the men, I mean, even those who could not speak English, they were, they were really making me understand just how out of place I was at the table. And I sat there. And I was the first to tell the mayor whatever I wanted to know and tell him this is what the women need and tell him this is how you give the city, the foundations give funding for domestic violence prevention to several of these groups, and they turn around and they don't do it. Oh, the guys they were so upset. But I told them, I said, they are changing. They are not saying domestic violence. They are changing it to something like family peace. And then they are giving the women who come to complain, oh, go home and be nice. You know, he works very hard. When he comes home, he's so tired. You just be nice, cook some food, that, ignore this, ignore the other. And like, that is so wrong. And the mayor, it was RT Ryback. He was so happy to hear that. You know, so I have done a couple of those things whenever the women call. I'm always ready to go. I've been with women to court who need orders for protection. Again, in the case of spousal abuse, and that is where I got a few people finding a way they could reach me. I've got calls of people yelling at me at the phone to give back their clients. I've taken their clients, and I'm like, how did I take your clients? A woman walked in here for me to help, and it becomes an issue. So yeah, there's been a few strange things that happen. And some of it is because you're a woman. Some of it is because you're an immigrant. And you just see those things like that. And you deal with them, because if you don't, then you are doing a disservice to some woman who probably really needs another woman speaking for her.
Well, I just want to say that you just sound, I mean, you're an amazing advocate for your community. You are truly a gift to many. We can see that. And it's just amazing what you've accomplished and your drive and your passion. There's so much passion. Can you tell us real quick, can you tell us what you would like to see for the future of your organization? Do you have some things that you're working towards?
Yes. One of the things I always let, there are some funders who want you to be doing change and all that stuff. It's not very easy for those of us who see people who have needs, and then we are going to change policy and all. But in our own way also, we've been able to affect policy, because we have a few departments who, like the Department of Health, has really improved by listening to the different groups that they serve. Recently, they were doing a feedback session, and I told them I can tell them about the changes in the Department of Health, because the grants we wrote about 15 years ago were so difficult, and the funding was usually given to other bigger organizations to say, yeah, we serve immigrants. And after all the input from us, it has changed so much that it is so much easier to write those proposals, they take into consideration the fact that a lot of their applicants do not have English as their first language. So they make sure you are not focusing on the expressions and not focus on the idea. So those changes have been made. So when I look at it, though, we do have the usual difficulties of funding. That's always a big one. You start off something and you cannot carry it further after 2 years because the funders have moved on to some other flavor of the month or something like that. So we are dealing with that. The good source of funding is usually from the state or the federal government because they will give you at least 3 years. They will give you a much larger amount of money, but you have to do the work first, you know? So it becomes a difficulty like, so I got $200,000. How do I get 50,000 right now to do the first part before they pay me back? Or the ones who pay only at the end of the year? It puts such a strain on you. There was a time it was so strenuous on my organization that I had to run and take money from my own account to do some work for the organization. So because of that, I am hesitant at at having more than 2 major programs going. I really would love to expand, but also I don't see any need to be duplicating services. So I will not go and be doing something that some other organization is doing and maybe doing very well. So focusing on African women's employment and the certified nursing assistant program is something that so far we are the only people doing it. The girls program, after school program and all the other things attached to it, it's only MAWA doing that. So because of that, I just want to develop and expand those programs to the point where they are really more productive, reaching more girls, and being certain of more funding along the way. So that's why I just want to limit it to those 2, because I don't want to be doing the duplicating.
You've just been so interesting, and I know that we'll put your organization MAWA in the credits, and I just thank you for not only starting your nonprofit, but for being the kind of person who makes an enormous difference for your community and indeed the world. Thank you so much. And thank you for It's a Woman's World. We hope you'll come back. There are a lot of interviews that we have on YouTube, and other stations. So you're welcome to look at those as well. Thank you so much. And thank you, Beverly and Nadia, and especially Melissa.
You're welcome.